For years, my family blamed me for my husband's death, until I showed them the police report and the $5 million life insurance policy. And in that moment, when I laid those papers on the table, they realized they had destroyed the only person who had ever loved them unconditionally. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if, for just a second, you feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening my soul. My name is Julia Anderson. I am 64 years old, and I live in a small, historic townhouse in the heart of Savannah, Georgia. That October morning, as the sun filtered warmly through the wrought iron grates of my kitchen windows, I was brewing coffee with a hint of cinnamon, just like I had every morning for the last 9 years. 9 years since my world turned into a silent hell. The aroma of the coffee mixed with the faint, sweet smell of dampness from the old brick walls that had witnessed decades of my life. On the worn wooden table, stained by thousands of family meals, my cell phone lay with its screen lit up. A text message I had been avoiding for hours. "Mom, we need to talk. Come to Henry's house at 3 p.m. It's urgent. Jenna." My trembling hands held the ceramic mug as I reread the message again and again. There were no emojis, no please, no warmth, just the coldness I had learned to recognize as the tone my children used with me since that fateful July night, when the phone rang at 11:47 p.m., and an unknown voice informed me that Larry, my husband, had been murdered. The wall clock in my kitchen showed 2:15, the same clock Larry had bought at a local arts festival during our first wedding anniversary, 42 years ago. Its hands seemed to move slower than usual, as if time itself feared what was to come. I put on my navy blue dress, the one Larry used to say made my eyes look like 2 pieces of the Georgia sky. I combed my graying hair back, put on the pearl earrings he had given me the day Henry was born, and took my brown leather purse, which was already showing the signs of constant use. In the entryway mirror, I saw a 64-year-old woman who had aged 10 years in the last 9. My eldest son's house was a 15-minute bus ride from my home. During the journey through the cobblestone streets of the historic district, I passed the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist, where Larry and I were married, past Forsyth Park, where I used to take my young children to play, past the bakery, where we bought cinnamon rolls every Sunday after church. Every place was a reminder of the family I had built with so much love, a family that now looked at me as if I were a dangerous stranger. As I got off the bus in Ardsley Park, where Henry lived with his wife Megan and my granddaughter Stella, I felt my legs weaken. It was one of those upper-middle-class neighborhoods that had boomed in recent years, with 2-story houses, manicured lawns, and iron gates. A life my children had built without ever inviting me to be a part of it. I rang the doorbell 3 times before Megan opened the door. Her gaze was cold, calculating. She didn't greet me. She just jerked her head inward, motioning for me to enter. She was wearing a beige cashmere sweater and designer jeans that I knew cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her French perfume filled my nostrils with a cloying scent that had always struck me as aggressive, as if she were marking her territory. "They're in the living room," she mumbled without making eye contact. The living room was decorated with modern furniture that clashed with the traditional Southern style I had taught them to appreciate. Gray leather sofas, a glass coffee table, and on the walls, family photographs where I was conspicuously absent. It was as if they had deliberately erased my existence from their visual history. Henry was sitting on the sofa, arms crossed, with an expression I couldn't decipher. At 38, he had become a successful man who ran a construction company. He had Larry's green eyes and my upturned nose, but his face held no trace of the sweet boy who used to hug me when he had nightmares. Jenna, my 35-year-old daughter, stood by the window, her back to me. She was an elementary school teacher and had always been the more sensitive of my children. But since her father's death, that sensitivity had turned into a coldness that cut like a knife. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, and she wore a black dress that made her look older than she was. The silence in that room was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, the distant hum of traffic, and the frantic beating of my own heart. "Sit down, Mom," Henry said without getting up, pointing to a single chair they had placed opposite the sofa, as if I were a defendant at a trial. I sat down slowly, placing my purse on my lap and lacing my fingers together to keep them from visibly shaking. It was then that Jenna turned around. Her eyes, those brown eyes she had inherited from my mother, were red as if she had been crying. But there was no compassion in them, only a cold rage that had been brewing for years. If it weren't for you, Dad would still be alive. The words shot from her mouth like poisoned daggers, each syllable loaded with 9 years of accumulated resentment. She just stood there, staring at me as if I were responsible for all the evil in the world. My heart stopped. I literally felt as if the air had been stolen from my lungs, and I'd forgotten how to breathe it back in. The accusation that had hung in the air for years, that I had felt in every averted gaze, every missed invitation, every forgotten birthday, had finally been spoken aloud. You called him that night, Jenna continued, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps. You insisted he come back from his trip to the lake. You told him you felt sick, that you were scared, that you needed him with you. And because of that, that's why they killed him. It's your fault, Mom. Because of your damn dependency. Henry got up from the sofa and began to pace, his hands in his pockets. Dad was happy on that fishing trip with his friends. It was the first real vacation he'd taken in years. But you couldn't let him be happy for even 1 week. Megan appeared in the doorway with a barely perceptible smirk at the corners of her mouth. It was the smile of someone who had waited years to witness this moment of familial destruction. Tears began to stream down my face, beyond my control. They weren't just tears of sadness, but a complex mix of pain, disbelief, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, anger. I was sick that night, I managed to whisper, my voice breaking. My blood pressure had dropped. I felt dizzy, confused. I just wanted Larry to know that. That what, Mom? Henry cut in, his voice sharp. That you couldn't be alone for 1 night without him? That you had to emotionally manipulate him into coming running back like always? The word manipulate hit me like a slap. In 42 years of marriage, I had never manipulated Larry. I had loved him, respected him, cared for him. I had worked alongside him to build the family and the life that my children now seemed to consider exclusively theirs. If you had been more independent, Jenna added, perching on the arm of the sofa, if you had learned to stand on your own 2 feet instead of always being the dependent wife, Dad wouldn't have had to rush home that night. He wouldn't have been on that dark road at 10 o'clock. He wouldn't have died for a goddamn watch. Silence once again filled the room. I could hear my own ragged breathing and the hum of the air conditioner, which suddenly seemed louder than normal. Megan came over and sat next to Henry. What your children are trying to say, Julia, is that we've all come to the same conclusion. It's time for you to take responsibility for what happened and make some mature decisions about your future. It all started long before that fatal night. For years, I was the one who held this family together with my hands, my time, my entire soul. While Larry worked as an accountant for the city government, I was the one who kept our home running like a Swiss watch. I'd wake up at 5:30 in the morning to make breakfast, get the school uniforms ready, do the homework my children forgot, and then rush to my job as a secretary at the Board of Education. During the first years of our marriage, when Larry barely earned enough to cover the rent on our small apartment in the Victorian district, I was the one who supplemented our income by selling homemade pies at the Forsyth Park Farmers Market on weekends. I'd get up at 3 in the morning to make the crusts, prepare the fillings for pecan pies and peach cobblers. My hands would crack from the cold of the Georgia mornings, but every dollar I earned I saved religiously for the down payment on the house we dreamed of owning. When Henry was 8 and Jenna was 5, Larry decided to get his master's in public administration. It's for our future, honey, he would tell me as I ironed his shirts at 11 o'clock at night after working all day. When I finish, we'll have a better life. I worked double shifts for 3 years, took care of the kids alone most days, and never once complained. I never told him I was exhausted, that I needed help, that sometimes I cried silently in the bathroom because I felt like I was fading away. It was with my inheritance when my mother passed away in 2001 that we were able to make the down payment on the house in the historic district where I still live. $20,000 that my mother had saved penny by penny selling sandwiches at her little downtown diner. So my Julia can have a home of her own, she had written in a letter we found among her things. Larry wanted to invest the money in a business, but I insisted on the house. The children need stability, I told him. They need a home that no one can ever take away from us. During my children's formative years, I was the one who stayed up all night when they had a fever, who went to parent-teacher conferences because Larry always had important commitments, who sewed the Halloween costumes, who taught Henry how to ride a bike in the park while Larry watched football. I was the one who saved, dollar by dollar, to buy them their first computers, who sold my gold earrings to pay for Jenna's sweet 16 party, who worked overtime for months to afford Henry's private university tuition when he didn't get into the state school. When Larry finally got his promotion to department head at City Hall, with a salary that allowed us to live more comfortably, I kept working, for the extras, he'd say. But the extras turned out to be everything. The groceries, the utilities, the birthday presents, the house repairs, the gas, the kids' sports uniforms. Larry's salary went to his investments and his nights out with friends. I was the one who managed the family budget, who knew exactly how much every gallon of milk, every loaf of bread, every school notebook cost. Larry lived in a bubble where money simply appeared when he needed it, without ever wondering who had juggled the finances to make it possible. I clearly remember the day Henry graduated with his civil engineering degree. I was so proud that I cried through the entire ceremony at the Lucas Theater. I had worked 6 days a week for 5 years to pay for that degree. When the ceremony ended, Henry hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Thanks, Mom. All of this is because of you." Larry smiled beside us, accepting congratulations from other parents as if the credit were shared equally. But things began to change when my children grew up and started their own lives. Henry met Megan during his senior year of college. She came from a wealthier family in Buckhead, Atlanta, and from day one, she made it clear that she considered our lifestyle quaint but limited. At family dinners, she would make seemingly innocent comments about how old-fashioned it was for me to still be working at my age, how traditional my cooking was, how small our house was compared to her parents' mansion. Julia should learn to relax more, she'd tell Larry while I was serving dessert. My mother retired at 55. She's dedicated to yoga, her friends, traveling. It's much healthier. Larry would nod as if the idea were reasonable, forgetting that I had worked all those years to build the stability he now enjoyed. Jenna, for her part, gradually drifted away after a fight we had when she was 25. She had started dating a guy who worried me because he drank too much and didn't have a steady job. When I expressed my concerns, she accused me of being nosy and controlling. "I'm not a little girl anymore, Mom. I can make my own decisions without you watching my every move." The relationship with that boy ended badly 6 months later, exactly as I had feared. But instead of thanking me for my concern, Jenna blamed me for pressuring her and causing problems in her relationship. From then on, she began to visit less, to call only when she needed something, to treat me with a polite coldness that hurt more than yelling ever could. Larry, in those years, became more distant. He came home late from work, spent weekends playing poker with his friends at a local bar. And when I tried to talk to him about my concerns with the kids, he'd tell me I was overreacting or being too sensitive. He started making comments about my age, about how women get neurotic after 50, about how draining it was to come home and find me always with problems. On my 58th birthday, I waited all afternoon for Larry to come home with some small gift, some surprise. I had made a beef brisket, his favorite dish, and set the table with the embroidered tablecloth we'd bought in Charleston on our honeymoon. He arrived at 11 o'clock at night, smelling of beer and cigarettes. He apologized, saying he'd had an emergency at the office, gave me a distracted kiss on the cheek, and went straight to the bedroom. He didn't even notice the brisket that had grown cold on the table. That night, as I cleared the unused plates and put the food away, I saw my reflection in the kitchen window. I was a 58-year-old woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to caring for others, and who was now becoming invisible to the very people I had raised with so much love. The last 2 years before Larry's death were the loneliest of my life. Henry was already married and living in his own house. Jenna had a job at a local elementary school and spent most of her free time with her teacher friends. Larry had taken up fishing trips with a group of retired buddies and would disappear for entire weekends without even asking if I wanted to come along. "It's no fun for you, Julia," he'd say when I asked why he never invited me. "You'd be bored. We just talk about fishing and politics." But the truth was, he had stopped seeing me as his life partner. I had become the administrator of his home, the person who made sure everything ran smoothly while he enjoyed his hard-earned free time. During those years, I developed high blood pressure. The doctor told me it was due to stress, age, hormonal changes. He prescribed pills I had to take every day and recommended I avoid stressful situations. But how do you avoid stress when your entire life has been built around solving other people's problems? On the night of July 23, 2014, Larry had gone to a cabin on Lake Lanier with his friends for a fishing weekend. It was the third time that month he'd been away. I was home alone as usual, watching old movies and knitting a sweater for my granddaughter who had just been born. Around 9 o'clock, I started to feel dizzy. My blood pressure had dropped lower than usual. I felt nauseous and there was a constant ringing in my ears. I called Jenna, but she didn't answer. I called Henry, but his phone was off. Finally, with trembling hands and a racing heart, I dialed Larry's number. "What is it now, Julia?" he answered, his voice impatient. I could hear the laughter of his friends and country music in the background. "I feel really sick, honey," I said, my voice weak. "I think my blood pressure is too low. I'm scared to be alone." There was a long silence. "Did you take your pill?" "Yes, but it's not working." "Larry, could you come home? Just for tonight." Another silence. "Oh, Julia, seriously? Can't you call a neighbor? Please," I begged. "I just need you here with me." Larry sighed heavily. "Fine. I'll be back in a couple of hours. But this can't keep happening, you hear? You can't be depending on me for everything." 2 hours later, Larry was dead. A gunshot to the chest for a watch worth a few $100s. And since that night, my children have blamed me for destroying our family. The first few months after the funeral were a fog of grief and guilt that stretched from the moment I opened my eyes until I finally managed to fall asleep with the help of the pills my doctor prescribed. But what hurt the most wasn't Larry's absence, but the hostile presence of my own children. Henry stopped visiting me altogether. The few times we ran into each other at Kroger or in some downtown office, he'd greet me with a cold nod and continue on his way as if I were a distant acquaintance. Jenna was crueler in her detachment. She would visit once a week, always on Sundays at 5 o'clock, sit in the living room for exactly 1 hour, ask if I needed anything urgent, and leave with the punctuality of someone fulfilling an unpleasant obligation. "How are you, Mom?" she'd ask without really listening to the answer. Her eyes would be fixed on her phone or staring out the window as I tried to tell her about my empty days, my sleepless nights, the feeling that the walls of the house were closing in on me. "That's good," she would respond automatically to everything I said. "I'm so glad to hear that." But her eyes showed no gladness. They showed impatience, resentment, and something worse, pity mixed with contempt. On the first anniversary of Larry's death, I decided to hold a small memorial for him. I bought flowers from the market, cooked his favorite meal, put on the Frank Sinatra records he loved so much, and lit candles around his photograph in the living room. I called my children to invite them. "Oh, Mom, I can't," Henry said without any further explanation. "I have plans." Jenna was more direct. "I don't think it's healthy for you to get stuck in the past. Dad is gone, and doing these ceremonies is only going to hurt you more." I was left alone that night, sitting in front of the makeshift altar, talking to Larry's photograph as if he could hear me. "Do you understand why they blame me?" I asked his smiling image. "Do you think it was my fault too?" The silence of the house was the only answer I could expect. But the real humiliations began when my first granddaughter, Stella, was born. Jenna called me 3 days after the delivery. "The baby's here," she announced with all the excitement of a weather report. "Her name is Stella. She's fine. Can I come see her?" I asked, my heart pounding. A granddaughter. A new chance to love and be loved in this family that was slipping through my fingers like water. "Let's wait a few weeks. The doctor says it's better to limit visitors at first." 3 weeks later, when I was finally allowed to meet Stella, I discovered there had been a constant parade of visitors. Jenna's friends, her fellow teachers, the neighbors, even Larry's old boss from City Hall had come to bring gifts. I was the last to meet my own granddaughter. The baby was beautiful, with my family's large eyes and her father's dark hair. When I held her, I felt such an intense wave of emotion that I began to cry. "She looks so much like you did when you were born," I told Jenna. "You have to let me come and help you. I can watch her when you have to go back to work." Jenna took the baby from my arms abruptly. "That won't be necessary, Mom. I've already hired a nanny. Someone professional." The word professional landed like a slap, as if 40 years of raising children didn't qualify me to care for my own grandchild. When Henry and Megan had their first daughter 2 years later, they didn't even tell me she had gone into labor. I found out from a photo Megan posted on Facebook. "Welcome to the world, Isabella Anderson Miller. Dad, Mom, and the Miller grandparents are so happy to meet you." The Miller grandparents. Megan's family had flown in from Atlanta to be there for the birth. I found out 3 days later when I saw the photo in my Facebook feed while eating breakfast alone in my kitchen. I called Henry immediately. "Why didn't you tell me she was born?" "It slipped my mind," he replied, his voice lacking any conviction. "Everything happened so fast. Henry, I'm your mother. I'm that little girl's grandmother." "I know, Mom. You can come visit her whenever you want. Just let us know beforehand." Let them know beforehand. As if I were a stranger who needed an appointment to see my own family. The first time I visited Isabella, Megan greeted me at the door with a handwritten list. "These are the house rules," she said, handing me the paper. "Read them before you come in." The list included things like, wash hands with antibacterial gel before holding the baby. Do not offer parenting advice unless asked. Visits should not exceed 1 hour. Do not bring homemade food without consulting first. And the one that hurt the most. Do not comment on the parents' decisions regarding Isabella's upbringing. I stood on the doorstep, reading this list that turned me into a supervised visitor in my own son's house. Megan waited with her arms crossed, looking at me with the superiority of someone who held all the power in the situation. "All clear?" she asked when I finished reading. I nodded because I had no other choice. If I wanted to see my granddaughter, I had to accept the humiliations. Over the next few years, the rules became stricter. I couldn't be left alone with Isabella because I wasn't up to date on modern childcare techniques. I couldn't give her sweets because Megan and Henry had decided she wouldn't have refined sugar until age 5. I couldn't tell her classic fairy tales because they preferred she learn more contemporary and educational stories. Little by little, I became an ornamental grandmother. I appeared in family photos when it was absolutely necessary, but I didn't participate in important decisions, wasn't consulted on anything, and wasn't part of the inner circle of trust where decisions about my granddaughter's futures were made. The final straw came on Isabella's first birthday. Megan organized a party at an event hall in Ardsley Park. She had hired clowns, a catering service, princess-themed decorations, and a professional photographer. The guest list included all of Megan's family, her college friends, Henry's co-workers, and half the neighborhood. I arrived on time with the gift I had been saving up to buy for months, a hand-carved wooden rocking chair I had commissioned from a craftsman in the mountains. It was a beautiful piece, the kind that gets passed down through generations with engravings of magnolias and cardinals. When it was time to open presents, Isabella received tablets, electronic toys, designer clothes, and a bicycle that cost more than my salary for 2 months. My rocking chair was pushed into a corner with other minor gifts. "How traditional," Megan's mother commented when she saw my gift. "Very folksy." The word folksy came out of her mouth as if she were describing something quaint but useless, something that belonged in a museum, not in her granddaughter's modern life. During the party, I sat at a table in the back of the room, next to some neighbors Megan had invited out of politeness, but who were clearly not part of the social circle she wanted to impress. As I watched my son hold his daughter and pose for professional photos with his wife's family, I realized I had been systematically erased from the family narrative. In all the important photos, I was in the background, or not there at all. In conversations about future plans for Isabella, my opinion was not sought. For decisions about daycare, schools, extracurricular activities, I found out after everything was already decided. "Why wasn't I consulted before you changed her daycare?" I asked Henry one afternoon when I casually learned they had enrolled Isabella in a private bilingual preschool. Because it's our decision, Mom, he replied impatiently. Megan and I are the parents. We don't need to consult with anyone else. But I'm her grandmother. I care about her education, and we know what's best for our daughter. The word our was like a knife. Not your granddaughter. Not part of the family. Our daughter. As if I were an outsider with no rights or voice in matters affecting my own blood. Sunday family dinners, which had been sacred in our house for years, disappeared completely. Larry and I had established the tradition that every Sunday the family would gather to eat. I would cook a pot roast or fried chicken. Larry would put on Sinatra, and we'd spend the afternoon playing rummy while the kids ran around the yard. After Larry's death, I tried to keep the tradition alive. The first few Sundays, my children came out of obligation, arrived late, ate quickly, and left early with excuses about social plans or work they had to finish. Mom, we're not kids anymore, Jenna explained one Sunday when I asked why she seemed so anxious to leave. We have our own lives, our own plans. Gradually, the visits became sporadic, then monthly, then only on mandatory dates like my birthday or Mother's Day. And even on those special occasions, the atmosphere was tense, forced, as if they were fulfilling an unpleasant but necessary duty. The last Mother's Day I spent with them, 3 years ago, was the definitive confirmation of my new status in the family. Henry arrived with a bouquet of flowers obviously bought at the gas station on the corner. Jenna brought a grocery store cake that still had the price tag on it. And Megan stayed in the car, watching the kid, for the entire visit. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," they said in unison, as if they had rehearsed the line. They gave me quick kisses on the cheek, sat in the living room for 20 minutes making small talk about the weather and the news, and left with the same haste with which they had arrived. That night, as I arranged the already wilting flowers and put away the cake I knew I would end up throwing out, I looked at myself in the entryway mirror and wondered when exactly I had stopped being a mother and become an obligation. But the real blow came 6 months later, when I discovered something that would forever change my perception of my marriage and my family. I was cleaning out Larry's closet, a task I had put off for 4 years because opening those doors meant facing the void his absence had left. His shirt still held the scent of his Old Spice, his ties were still hung in the meticulous order he always kept, and his dress shoes were lined up like soldiers awaiting orders that would never come. Among the papers on his desk, hidden inside a manila envelope under years of old tax returns, I found something that made my blood run cold. A life insurance policy for $5 million in my name, taken out just 6 months before his death. $5 million. My hands shook as I read and reread the document. The premium had been paid in full, the policy was active, and I was the sole beneficiary. Larry had invested a considerable amount of money to secure my financial future, and he had never said a single word to me about it. Along with the policy, I found a letter in his handwriting, dated 3 weeks before the fatal trip to the lake. My dearest Julia, if you're reading this letter, it means something has happened to me. I want you to know that I will carry to my grave the regret of not having valued you enough during our last years together. You are the most generous and self-sacrificing woman I have ever known, and I was a fool for not showing you that every single day. This insurance is my way of asking for your forgiveness and making sure you will never want for anything. Please, use it to be happy, to travel, to do everything you sacrificed for our family. I love you, Larry. I cried for hours holding that letter, not just for the renewed loss of my husband, but for the revelation that he had recognized my sacrifices. He had valued what I had done for our family, and more importantly, he had taken concrete steps to protect my future. But there was something else in that envelope that deeply disturbed me. A complete police report of the crime, which Larry had requested and paid a private investigator for just a week after the murder. The report detailed meticulously that the crime had been completely random, that the muggers had been targeting several cars that night looking for suitable victims, that they had attacked 2 other people that same week in the Lake Lanier area. The assailants, according to the report, had confessed upon their arrest that they had chosen Larry because he was driving alone, because it was dark, because he was wearing a visible watch, and because the spot was poorly lit. They didn't know who he was, where he was coming from, or that he was returning for a family emergency. To them, Larry was simply a target of opportunity. The official police report, which my children had seen during the legal proceedings, clearly stated that the crime had nothing to do with my phone call, that it would have happened regardless of why Larry was on that street that night. My own children had access to this information. They knew I was not to blame. And yet, they had chosen to blame me. For 4.5 years, they had let me carry a guilt they knew was unjustified. They had built their resentment on a lie they themselves knew to be false. That revelation shattered me more than Larry's death itself. The next day, I went to the bank to verify the insurance information. The account manager, a young and efficient woman named Amanda, reviewed all the documents and confirmed that the policy was fully active and that the money had been available to me since the moment of Larry's death. "Why did you never claim the payout?" she asked with professional curiosity. "Because I didn't know it existed," I answered honestly. Amanda frowned. "That's odd. The bank sent several notifications to your home address. They also should have contacted the secondary beneficiaries if we didn't receive a response from you." "Secondary beneficiaries?" "Yes. According to the contract, if you did not claim the money within a 5-year period, the secondary beneficiaries would be your children, Henry and Jenna Anderson." Everything began to make sense with a painful clarity. My children knew about the insurance. They had been waiting for me to not claim it so they could inherit it themselves. Their coldness, their distance, their calculated cruelty, it had all been part of a strategy to keep me away from a fortune that was legally mine. "I want to file the claim today," I told Amanda, with a determination I hadn't felt in years. The process took 2 weeks, 14 days during which I couldn't sleep, during which every past interaction with my children took on a completely different meaning. Every excuse not to visit, every refusal to include me in family gatherings, every calculated humiliation, it had all been designed to keep me isolated, depressed, and without the strength to look into my own financial affairs. When the money was finally deposited into my account, I sat in my kitchen staring at the bank statement as if it were a document in a foreign language. For the first time in my adult life, I had complete financial independence. For the first time, I depended on no one for my survival. But along with that financial freedom came an even more bitter revelation. For nearly 5 years, my children had treated me like a financial burden when in reality I had more money available than they had ever dreamed of. I remembered all the times Megan had commented on how expensive it would be to take care of me in my old age, all the conversations about nursing homes and planning for the future. I remembered how Henry had suggested I sell the house because it was too big for one person, and the upkeep was getting too expensive. Now I understood they weren't worried about my well-being. They were worried because they saw my longevity as an obstacle between them and the insurance money they thought they would eventually inherit. That night, for the first time since Larry's death, I didn't take the sleeping pills that had been my constant companions for years. I stayed awake until dawn, not out of anxiety or sadness, but out of planning. The next day, I hired a lawyer, not just to protect my new assets, but to find out what else my own children had been hiding from me. Mr. Mendoza, an older man with decades of experience in family law, reviewed all my documents with the meticulousness of a detective. "Julia," he said after 3 hours of analysis, "you need to know something important. Your children have been making legal inquiries behind your back." My heart raced. "What kind of inquiries?" "They have consulted with other attorneys about the possibility of having you declared mentally incompetent. They've argued that your emotional state after your husband's death could justify them taking control of your finances and properties." The room began to spin. Mentally incompetent? It's a legal strategy some children use when they want to take control of an elderly parent's estate. Obviously, it didn't proceed because you are perfectly sound and functional, but the fact that they even tried speaks to their true intentions. I left the lawyer's office feeling as if I had been hit by a truck. My own children, my flesh and blood, the people for whom I had sacrificed my entire adult life, had not only unjustly blamed me for their father's death, but had also tried to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my rightful inheritance. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable for the Julia of 6 months ago. I changed my will, removed Henry and Jenna as heirs, and established a trust that would donate the majority of my assets to charitable organizations after my death. But before I signed the final documents, I decided to give them one last chance to redeem themselves. A chance to show me that, deep in their hearts, there was still a shred of the love they had once felt for the woman who raised them. I sent them both a text. "I need to talk to you about something very important regarding your father. It's urgent. Can you come for dinner tomorrow at 7? Henry replied, "How urgent?" "I have an important meeting." Jenna was more direct. "Mom, I hope this isn't another one of your emotional crises. We already talked about this with the therapist we recommended." The therapist they had recommended was actually part of their strategy to document my supposed mental instability. They had been building a case against me from the beginning. "It's not a crisis," I replied. "It's about your father's life insurance." The change in the tone of their responses was immediate and telling. "Henry, life insurance? What are you talking about? I'll be there at 7 sharp. Jenna, Mom, did you find something? I can be there right now if you want." Suddenly, after years of excuses and evasions, my children were desperate to see me. The difference in their attitude was so obvious, so mercenary, that I almost wanted to laugh. But it wasn't a time for laughter. It was a time for justice. I prepared that dinner as if it were my final performance in the theater of the family I had built with so much love, and that was now crumbling before my eyes. I set the table with the embroidered tablecloth that had been a wedding gift from my godmother, took out the fine china we only used on special occasions, and lit the candles that had illuminated so many family celebrations over the years. I cooked a beef Wellington, the most labor-intensive dish I knew, but one that had always been my children's favorite. I spent the entire afternoon preparing the pastry, searing the beef, making the duxelles. It was a recipe that required patience, love, and time. Everything I had invested in my children for decades. As I cooked, every movement of my hands reminded me of the thousands of meals I had prepared for them. The breakfasts before school when they had to get up early for exams, the special dinners on their birthdays, the lunches I brought to school when they forgot their lunchboxes. Each dish had been a declaration of love, a silent way of telling them they mattered, that they were the most precious thing in my world. At 7 o'clock sharp, as if they had coordinated their arrival, they rang the doorbell at the same time. I saw them through the living room window. Henry getting out of his new truck, Jenna closing her car door with nervous movements, and Megan getting out of the passenger seat with that calculating expression I had learned to recognize over so many years. When I opened the door, the difference in their demeanor was immediately apparent. Henry greeted me with a smile I hadn't seen in years, Jenna gave me a hug that lasted longer than 2 seconds, and even Megan offered a smile that almost seemed sincere. "Mom, it smells delicious," Jenna said, inhaling the aroma coming from the kitchen. "Is that beef Wellington? You haven't made that in years." "I made it last year for your birthday," I reminded her gently, "but you didn't come to dinner." An uncomfortable silence filled the entryway. Henry cleared his throat. "Well, we're here now," he said, with the false cheerfulness people use when they want to change the subject quickly. "What did you want to talk to us about?" "Let's eat first," I said, guiding them to the dining room. Like old times. For the first 20 minutes of dinner, my children made an obvious effort to be charming. They asked about my health, praised the food, and even Megan made a few positive comments about the improvements I had made to the house. But I could see the impatience growing in their eyes, the tension in the way they held their forks, the way they glanced at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. Finally, when we finished dessert, a crème brûlée I had made that morning, Henry couldn't contain himself any longer. "Mom, you mentioned something about Dad's life insurance." I smiled and stood up from the table. "Yes, I found some interesting papers." I went to my bedroom and returned with the manila envelope containing all the documents: the insurance policy, Larry's letter, the complete police report, and the documents my lawyer had prepared showing the legal inquiries my children had made behind my back. I placed them on the table, one by one, as if I were dealing cards in a poker game where I finally held the winning hand. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Jenna's quickened breathing, the rustle of Henry's clothes as he shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the ticking of the wall clock marking the seconds as my family processed what was in front of them. Megan was the first to react. She stood up from her chair and picked up the insurance policy with trembling hands. $5 million, she whispered, reading the document. Julia, did you know about this? I found out 2 weeks ago, I replied calmly. Along with this. I showed them the complete police report. Henry read it in silence, his face growing paler as he progressed through the pages. Mom, Jenna said, her voice trembling. We didn't know that. You didn't know what? I interrupted, my voice remaining surprisingly steady. You didn't know that the crime was completely random? You didn't know that I had absolutely nothing to do with your father's death? Henry dropped the report on the table as if it were burning hot. Mom, or do you mean you didn't know that Larry had taken out this insurance to protect me? I continued, picking up my husband's handwritten letter. You didn't know that your father had realized all the sacrifices I had made for this family and wanted to secure my future? I read the letter aloud, word for word. When I got to the part where Larry asked for my forgiveness for not valuing me enough, my voice broke slightly. But I continued to the end. Jenna was now openly weeping. Henry had his head in his hands. Megan stared at the documents with an expression that mixed shock with something I could only describe as financial panic. For 4.5 years, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word, you have blamed me for something you knew wasn't my fault. For 4.5 years, you have treated me like a murderer, a burden, an annoying obligation. I held up the last document, my lawyer's report on their legal inquiries. And all this time, you were planning how to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could control my finances. Megan's reaction was immediate and revealing. She shot up from her chair so abruptly she nearly knocked it over. Julia, that's not what it looks like. We were just worried about your well-being, your emotional state after— My emotional state? I interrupted, standing up myself. My emotional state deteriorated because my own children made me an outcast in my own family. Because you decided it was easier to blame me than to process your own grief over losing your father. Henry finally looked up. His eyes were red, though I'm not sure if it was from sorrow or shame. Mom, you have to understand. What do I have to understand? I yelled, surprised at the force coming from my throat. That I sacrificed my entire adult life for you, only to be repaid with betrayal? That I worked double shifts to pay for your college so you could later try to steal what little I had left? Jenna stood up and approached me with her arms outstretched. Mom, please, we can fix this. We can— Fix what? I stepped back to avoid her embrace. Are you going to bring Larry back to life? Are you going to give me back the 5 years I lost feeling guilty for something I didn't do? Are you going to erase all the humiliation, all the slights, all the times you made me feel like a stranger in my own family? Megan, apparently recovering from the initial shock, adopted that calculating expression I knew so well. Julia, I think you're misinterpreting things. Maybe you should talk to a therapist before making any major decisions. The money can wait until you're calmer. I looked her straight in the eye and smiled. A cold smile I had never used with any member of my family before. Megan, I've already claimed the insurance. The money is already in my bank account. And I've already changed my will. The color completely drained from her face. What does that mean? It means I no longer depend on you for anything. It means that for the first time in my adult life, I have complete financial independence. And it means that neither of you will inherit a single penny from me. Henry shot up so fast his chair fell backward. Mom, you can't be serious. We're your family. We're your children. My children, I laughed bitterly. My children wouldn't have tried to have me declared insane to steal my inheritance. My children wouldn't have blamed me for years for something they knew wasn't my fault. My children wouldn't have made me a stranger at their own daughters' birthdays. I walked to the living room window and looked out at the street where I had lived for over 30 years, where I had raised these children who had become greedy strangers. For years, I wondered what I did wrong as a mother. I blamed myself for not knowing how to raise more loving, more grateful children. But now I realize it wasn't my fault. I raised 2 children who grew up to be adults capable of emotionally torturing their own mother for money. I turned to face them one last time. I want you to leave my house. Now. Mom, Jenna whispered. Please don't do this. We can talk. The time for talking is over, I said, walking to the front door and pulling it wide open. You had 5 years to talk to me, to treat me with respect, to include me in your lives. Instead, you chose cruelty and greed. One by one, they walked out of my house. Megan was first, obviously furious, but trying to maintain a facade of dignity. Henry stopped on the threshold. Mom, this can't be the end. We're family. Family is built on love and respect, I replied. You gave me guilt and emotional blackmail. That's not family. That's extortion. Jenna was the last to leave. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. What about our daughters, Isabella and Stella? Are you going to punish them for our mistakes? For the first time all night, my resolve wavered. My granddaughters. The 2 little people who had nothing to do with their parents' cruel decisions. Your daughters will always be welcome in my house, I said finally. But they will come alone, without you, and they will get to know their real grandmother, not the broken version you helped create. I closed the door and stood in my entryway, listening to the sound of their cars driving away down the street. For the first time in 5 years, my house was completely silent, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of freedom. For the first time since Larry's death, my house felt like a home, and not a mausoleum of painful memories. I decided to do something I hadn't done in decades. Live for myself. I hired a deep cleaning service that transformed every corner of the house. They threw out years of accumulated junk I was saving, just in case I needed it someday. They donated clothes I hadn't worn since Larry died, books I would never reread, and all the objects I kept only because they had belonged to my children when they were little. Are you sure you want to get rid of this? Sarah, the head of the cleaning crew, asked me, holding up a box full of drawings Henry had made in elementary school. Completely sure, I replied without a hint of nostalgia. Those drawings were made by children who no longer exist. They redecorated the living room with new furniture in colors that I liked, not the neutral tones Larry had preferred. I bought plants to fill the house with life. Ferns for the living room, geraniums for the patio, orchids for my bedroom. Each new addition was a declaration of independence, an affirmation that this house now belonged entirely to me. A week after the confrontation, as I was watering my new plants on the back patio, I heard someone ringing the front doorbell insistently. When I looked through the window, I saw Megan standing in the afternoon sun, her hair disheveled and a desperate expression on her face that I had never seen before. I opened the door but kept the security chain on. What do you want, Megan? Julia, we need to talk, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Please let me in. There's nothing to talk about. Yes, there is, she insisted, moving closer to the door. I don't think you understand the consequences of what you're doing, not just for us, but for you too. Something in her tone intrigued me enough to remove the chain and open the door fully. Megan walked in without waiting for an invitation and went straight to the living room as if it were her own house. Sit down, she said, pointing to my own sofa as if she were the hostess. We need to talk like adults. I'm fine standing, I replied, crossing my arms. Say what you came to say. Megan took a deep breath and put on that expression she had perfected over the years. A mix of condescension and false concern she used when she wanted to manipulate a situation in her favor. Julia, I understand you're upset. You have every right to be. But what you're doing is going to end up hurting you more than it hurts us. How so? Because you're a 64-year-old woman, all alone, with no family. What's going to happen when you get sick? Who's going to take care of you? Who's going to make medical decisions for you if you lose the ability to make them yourself? I smiled at the irony. The same person who's been making decisions for me for the last 5 years. Myself. Don't be naive, Megan continued, her voice growing harsher. Money isn't everything. You can hire caregivers, but you can't buy family. You can't buy someone who actually cares about you. You're right, I said, walking to the window. I can't buy family, but apparently I can't keep the family I helped create either, because it turns out the family I raised only cares about my money, not me. Megan got up from the sofa and approached me. Look, Julia, let's be honest with each other. I know you never liked me, and you never fully accepted me into the family. That's not true. Yes, it is, she interrupted. But that doesn't mean we can't find a way to coexist, especially now that, well, now that circumstances have changed. You mean now that you found out I have money? Megan had the decency to look slightly ashamed. I mean, we all made mistakes, including you. But we're adults. We can get past this. What mistakes did I make, Megan? Well, you were too dependent on Larry. You called him that night when you knew he was trying to relax. And after he died, you became demanding. You always wanted us to visit, to include you in everything. It was exhausting. I looked at her in silence for a long moment. This woman, who had entered my family as a daughter-in-law and had gradually poisoned the relationship between my children and me, now had the audacity to sit in my living room and explain to me what my mistakes as a mother had been. You know what, Megan? You're right about one thing. I was too dependent. But not on Larry. I was too dependent on the idea that the people you love will love you back with the same intensity. Julia, I was too dependent on the belief that if you sacrifice everything for your family, they'll value that sacrifice. I walked to the front door and opened it. And you're right about something else. It was exhausting. But not for you. It was exhausting for me. It was exhausting to love people who clearly didn't love me back. That's not fair, Megan said. But she didn't move toward the door. Henry loves you. Jenna loves you. It's just that things got complicated after Larry died. Things didn't get complicated, Megan. You decided to complicate them. You decided to blame me for something you knew wasn't my fault because it was convenient for you to have a scapegoat. Finally, Megan walked to the door, but she stopped right on the threshold. This isn't over, Julia. You can't just cut off your family and pretend they don't exist. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. We're your only relatives. Without us, you have no one. The money will run out eventually, and then what are you going to do? I smiled with a calmness that surprised even me. I'm going to do what I've been doing for the last 5 years. Survive. But this time, I'm going to survive without carrying the guilt you all decided to place on me. Megan left without another word. But I could see in her eyes that this conversation hadn't ended the way she expected. She had come to my house expecting to find a vulnerable, frightened woman willing to negotiate her dignity for crumbs of family affection. Instead, she had found someone who had finally learned her own worth. 2 days later, the true nature of my family was fully revealed. I was at the local market buying groceries for the week when Carol, my neighbor of many years, approached me with a worried expression. Julia, are you okay? I heard some rumors. What kind of rumors? Well, Carol lowered her voice and looked around to make sure no one else was listening. Megan has been telling everyone that you've become unstable, that since Larry's death you've been having mental problems and now you're making irrational decisions with your money. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What else has she been saying? She says you tried to give away your entire inheritance to charity, that you've been acting paranoid, that you don't trust your own family. She also says they've been consulting with lawyers because they're concerned for your well-being. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. If they couldn't have me declared mentally incompetent through legal channels, they would destroy my reputation in the community. They would plant seeds of doubt about my mental stability among the people who knew me, creating a narrative where they were the concerned children and I was the elderly mother who had lost her mind. Carol, I asked, what do you think? My neighbor studied me carefully, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. She had known my children since they were little, had witnessed my dedication as a mother, but she had also seen my grief after Larry's death. Honestly, Julia, I think you look better than you have in years. Calmer, more at peace. But I also understand why people might be worried. It's been a very drastic, very sudden change. It was exactly what Megan was counting on. Any positive change in my life would be interpreted as evidence of mental instability. If I was sad, it was because I couldn't get over Larry's death. If I was happy, it was because I'd lost my mind. That afternoon, I decided to do something my children didn't expect. I fought back. I called my lawyer and explained what was happening. Mr. Mendoza listened patiently and then asked me a question that took me by surprise. Julia, would you be willing to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation? What for? To have official documentation of your mental competency. If your children continue this smear campaign, we need irrefutable medical evidence that you are perfectly sane and capable of making your own decisions. The evaluation lasted 4 hours, and covered everything from my memory and logical reasoning to my emotional stability and my understanding of the financial consequences of my decisions. The psychiatrist, an older man named Dr. Evans, asked me questions about my childhood, my marriage, Larry's death, and my current relationship with my children. At the end of the session, he looked at me over his glasses and smiled. "Julia, not only are you completely sane, but I would say you're exhibiting a level of mental health better than many people your age I've evaluated. You have made difficult but rational decisions based on objective information about how you've been treated by your family. There is no evidence of any kind of cognitive decline, irrational paranoia, or impaired judgment. And will that be documented? Absolutely. And if anyone ever tries to question your mental competency in the future, this report will be legal evidence that at this point in your life, you were in full possession of your mental faculties." I left Dr. Evans's office feeling validated in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being irrational. I was being, for the first time in decades, completely honest about what I needed to be happy. But my children weren't done with me. Their next move would be the cruelest of all. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was drinking coffee on my back patio and watching my new plants begin to thrive in the Georgia sun. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered because I had learned that avoiding things doesn't make them go away. "Mrs. Julia Anderson?" a very young female voice asked. "Yes, this is she. I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your granddaughter Isabella is here in the emergency room. She's had an accident." My heart stopped. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the patio tiles, splashing hot liquid on my bare feet. "What kind of accident? Is she okay? Where are her parents?" "The parents are on their way, but the little girl asked for you specifically. She said she wanted to see her grandma Julia. Can you come to the hospital?" I don't remember locking the house or driving to the hospital. The next thing I knew, I was running down the emergency room hallways, following a nurse to a small room where Isabella, my 5-year-old granddaughter, was sitting on a hospital bed with her arm in a sling. "Grandma!" she cried when she saw me, reaching her good arm out to me. I hugged her carefully, feeling her small body tremble against mine. "What happened, my love? How did you get hurt?" "I fell off my bike at the park," she explained with the seriousness children have when they talk about their adventures. "My arm hurts a lot, but the doctor says it's not broken, just sprained." "And where are your mom and dad?" Isabella looked down. "Dad was in a really important meeting. Mom said she couldn't leave work, but I wanted you to come." Something didn't add up. How had Isabella gotten to the hospital? Who had been watching her when she had the accident? "Honey, who brought you to the hospital?" "My friend Sebastian's mom. We were playing in the park when I fell. She brought me here and called my parents, but she also called you because I asked her to." At that moment, Henry and Megan appeared in the doorway. Their expressions when they saw me were a mix of surprise, annoyance, and something that took me a moment to identify: guilt. "Mom," Henry said, approaching the bed, "we didn't expect you to come." "Isabella asked me to come," I replied, not letting go of my granddaughter's hand. Megan came to the other side of the bed. "Isabella, sweetie, we're here now. Your grandmother can go home." "No," Isabella said firmly. "I want Grandma Julia to stay." "Sweetheart, Grandma Julia has things to do," Megan insisted with that forced smile she used when she wanted to seem sweet but was furious. "What things?" Isabella asked with the relentless logic of a 5-year-old. "She's my grandma. Grandmas take care of their grandkids when they're hurt." Henry and Megan looked at each other over Isabella's head. I could see the silent conversation they were having. How to get rid of me without making a scene in front of their daughter. For the next 2 hours, as we waited for the X-ray results, Isabella didn't let go of my hand. She told me about her school, her friends, a kitten she had seen on the way to the park. It was a normal conversation between a grandmother and granddaughter, the kind we hadn't had in years because her parents always found reasons to cut my visits short. When the doctor finally confirmed there was no fracture and that Isabella could go home with painkillers and rest, my granddaughter made a request that would change everything. "I want to go to Grandma Julia's house," she announced, "so she can take care of me until I feel better." "Isabella, no," Megan said immediately. "You're coming home with us." But Grandma Julia knows how to make chamomile tea for when I'm hurting, and she has lots of pretty plants. And she reads me stories with funny voices. Your mom can make tea too, Henry said, but his voice didn't sound very convincing. She doesn't know how. The last time I was sick, she gave me medicine from the store and made me watch TV. The brutal honesty of children can be devastating. Isabella was unknowingly describing the difference between genuine care and care of convenience. Grandma Julia, she asked, looking at me with those big eyes she had inherited from my family, can I stay with you tonight? Please. I looked at Henry and Megan. This was a perfect opportunity to build bridges, to show them that despite everything that had happened, I was still the grandmother I had always wanted to be for my granddaughters. If your parents agree, I told Isabella, I would love to take care of you. Megan opened her mouth to object, but Henry stopped her with a gesture. I could see the wheels turning in his head. Maybe this would be a chance to prove I was irresponsible, that I couldn't properly care for an injured child. Okay, he said finally, but just for tonight, and you have to call us if anything happens. Of course, I agreed. Isabella grinned as if she'd won the lottery. On the way to my house, Isabella chattered non-stop from the back of my car, where I had carefully secured her in her car seat. She told me about all the things she wanted to do at my house, how she had missed visiting me, how different my living room looked with the new furniture. Grandma, why don't we ever come to your house anymore? She asked suddenly. With that ability, children have to ask questions that cut straight to the heart of the matter. Well, I said, choosing my words carefully, sometimes grown-ups have disagreements. But that doesn't mean I don't love you and Stella. Did you have a disagreement with my mom and dad? Something like that. Isabella processed this information silently for a moment. Was it because you got sad when Grandpa Larry died? The little girl's insight surprised me. Yes, honey, it was something related to that. I got sad when Grandpa Larry died too, she said thoughtfully. But nobody got mad at me. Out of the mouths of babes comes the simplest, most devastating truth. That night, as I made chamomile tea with honey and gave Isabella painkillers according to the doctor's instructions, I realized how much I had missed these simple moments of care, reading her stories, tucking her into the guest bed, singing her the lullabies I had sung to her parents decades before. Isabella fell asleep holding my hand, and I sat by her bed for a long time, watching her peaceful breathing and remembering all the nights I had spent the same way with Henry and Jenna when they were little. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Megan. How's Isabella? She's fine. She took her medicine, had some soup, and she's already asleep. Good. We'll pick her up early tomorrow. Megan, I said, making a spontaneous decision, can I ask you something? What? Why weren't you with her when she had the accident? There was a long silence. We had commitments. Mrs. Martinez offered to watch the kids at the park. These things happen. These things shouldn't happen, Megan. A 5-year-old girl shouldn't have to ask a stranger to call her grandmother because her parents are too busy to come when she gets hurt. Don't you dare judge our parenting, she said in a cold voice. We wouldn't have even known Isabella was hurt if it weren't for Mrs. Martinez. Exactly, I replied. You rely on strangers to watch your children. But when those strangers can't handle an emergency, who do they call? Me, the unstable grandmother who supposedly can't take care of anyone. Another long pause. Julia, tonight was just an emergency. Don't make it into anything else. Make what into anything else? Don't start thinking this means things are going back to the way they were. Isabella can spend the night with you because she's hurt, but tomorrow things go back to normal. I hung up the phone without another word. The next morning, when Henry and Megan arrived to pick up Isabella, my granddaughter didn't want to leave. Can I stay one more day, Grandma? She asked, hugging my leg. My arm still hurts a little. Isabella, let's go, Megan said sharply. We've already abused your grandmother's hospitality enough. But as Isabella was gathering her things, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Megan was talking on the phone in a low voice in my living room, but the walls of my old house are thin, and I could hear every word. Yeah, it worked perfectly, she was saying. Isabella was with her all night. Now we have proof that Julia is trying to manipulate the kids to take her side. No, it wasn't exactly planned, but when Isabella got hurt, we saw an opportunity and took it. Of course we documented everything. We have photos. text messages, proof that she's using Isabella to emotionally blackmail us. My world tilted on its axis. Isabella's accident had been real, but Megan had seen it as an opportunity to set a trap. They had allowed my granddaughter to ask to stay with me, had documented my manipulative behavior, and now had more ammunition for their narrative that I was a toxic grandmother using her grandchildren to hurt my own children. Isabella hadn't been a granddaughter seeking comfort from her grandmother. She had been, unknowingly, a pawn in the cruel game her parents were playing with me. After they left, I sat in my newly decorated living room and finally understood the depth of the war my children had declared on me. They didn't just want my money. They didn't just want to justify years of emotional abuse. They wanted to completely destroy me. But there was something my children hadn't counted on: the transformative power of hitting rock bottom and discovering you can still get up. That same afternoon, after processing the conversation I had overheard, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had been avoiding for months. "Savannah Travel? This is Julia Anderson. I'd like to book a trip." "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. Where would you like to go?" For the first time in decades, the answer came without hesitation. "Wherever I want." I booked a Caribbean cruise that would depart in 3 weeks. 15 days sailing between tropical islands, eating at elegant restaurants, sleeping in a cabin with an ocean view, meeting people who knew nothing about my family history. 15 days of being just Julia, not the guilty widow, not the rejected mother, not the manipulative grandmother. Just Julia. After making the reservation, I sat in my backyard and dialed another number. "The Telfair Academy? I'd like to sign up for a painting class." I had dreamed of learning to paint since I was a little girl, but first there was school, then work, then children, then grandchildren. There had always been someone more important than my own dreams. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, my days took on a completely new rhythm. In the mornings, I took watercolor painting classes. In the afternoons, I read novels I had wanted to read for years, but never had the time. In the evenings, I ate at restaurants in the historic district where they treated me like a valued customer, not a family burden. My phone rang constantly. Henry, Jenna, Megan, all leaving messages that I listened to but didn't answer. The messages followed a predictable pattern. First anger, then emotional blackmail, and finally panic when they realized they no longer had any power over me. "Mom, we need to talk about Isabella," one of Henry's messages said. "You can't just disappear from her life after taking care of her that night." "Julia, you're acting like a child," Megan said in another message. "All families have problems. You can't just run away every time things get hard." "Mom, please," Jenna begged in the most recent message. "Stella asks about you every day. Don't punish the girls for our mistakes." But I wasn't running away anymore. For the first time in my adult life, I was running toward something, toward the possibility of being happy on my own terms. A week before my trip, while buying new clothes at the Oglethorpe Mall, brightly colored dresses I had never dared to wear, swimsuits that made me feel beautiful, comfortable shoes for walking on Caribbean beaches, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. Julia Anderson? I turned and saw Carmen Davis, a friend from high school I had lost touch with over 4 decades ago. She was elegantly dressed, with perfectly styled silver hair and a genuine smile that filled me with warmth. "Carmen, what a surprise! How are you?" "Doing great, thank you, and look at you, all dressed up. Shopping for a special occasion?" "I'm going on a cruise next week," I said, surprised at how natural the sentence sounded. "How wonderful. I just got back from a tour of Europe with a group of friends. At our age, we can finally do the things we always wanted to, right?" We talked for an hour at the mall's coffee shop. Carmen told me about her amicable divorce after 30 years of marriage, about how her adult children had learned to respect her choices, about the countries she'd visited, and the dance classes she'd taken. "You know the best thing about turning 60? She said as we sipped our coffee. "You finally understand that you don't have to ask anyone's permission to be happy." That night, for the first time since Larry's death, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in my bedroom, and I liked what I saw. I wasn't the young woman I had been, but I also wasn't the broken woman I had become over the last few years. I was someone new, someone who had learned her own worth. On the day of my departure for Miami, where I would board the cruise ship, I received an unexpected visit. Isabella and Stella were standing at my door with Jenna. But this time, my daughter didn't look arrogant or manipulative. She looked desperate. "Mom?" she said when I opened the door. The girls wanted to say goodbye. Isabella ran to me and hugged my legs. "Grandma? Why are you leaving? Did I do something wrong when I stayed at your house?" My heart broke and healed at the same time. I knelt down to her level. "No, my love. You did nothing wrong. Grandma is going on vacation, just like when your mommy and daddy go on vacation." "But are you coming back?" Stella asked with those innocent eyes that only 3-year-olds have. "Yes, I'm coming back. And when I do, if your parents want, you can come visit me. But this time they'll be real visits, not obligatory ones." I looked directly at Jenna. "Do you understand what that means?" Jenna nodded, her eyes filled with tears that seemed genuine for the first time in years. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't realize what we were doing to you." "You did know," I said gently but firmly. "You all knew. But you chose to do it anyway. Can we try again? When you get back?" "Jenna, I will always be your mother and your daughter's grandmother. But the relationship we have from now on is going to be different. It's going to be one where you respect me, where you value my time, where you recognize that I am a whole person, not just a family function." "I understand," she said. And for the first time in years, I believed she actually did. The cruise was eye-opening in ways I had never anticipated. I met other women my age who had made similar choices. Margaret, a widow from Texas who had sold her house after her adult children treated her like a free babysitter. Rosa, a divorcee from Colombia who had used her settlement to travel the world after decades of sacrificing for an unappreciative family. Patricia, a single woman from Spain who had cared for her elderly parents for 15 years, and now, at 68, was finally living her own life. "You know what the secret is?" Margaret told me one night as we watched the sunset from the ship's deck, realizing that true love doesn't require you to shrink yourself to make others feel bigger. During those 15 days, I learned to salsa dance. I tried foods I had never imagined. I read entire books without interruption. And for the first time in decades, I had conversations about topics that had nothing to do with other people's problems. I learned that I had opinions on international politics, that I liked contemporary art, that I could hold fascinating conversations about Savannah's history with other passengers interested in American culture. I discovered that I was funny, intelligent, and good company when I wasn't constantly worried about pleasing people who had decided not to be pleased. When the cruise ended and I returned to Savannah, my house felt different. Not because it had physically changed, but because I had changed. It was no longer a refuge where I hid from the world. It was my home, my sanctuary, the place where a free woman had chosen to live. 3 months after my return, Henry knocked on my door one Sunday afternoon. He was alone. No Megan, no defensive attitude, no arrogance that had characterized our interactions for years. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, "can we talk?" I invited him in, but this time not to my newly decorated living room. We sat in my backyard, among the plants that had grown lush in my absence, under the afternoon Georgia sun that lit up the space I had created for myself. "I want to apologize," he began, and for the first time since his father's death, his voice sounded like the boy I had raised with so much love. "Not just for what happened with the insurance, but for everything. For blaming you, for excluding you, for letting Megan treat you the way she did. Henry?" "No, Mom, let me finish. During these months that you've been different, I've had time to think. I've seen how Isabella talks about you, how she asks for you. I've remembered how you were with us when we were little, and I've realized that I was an idiot." He fell silent for a moment, nervously tearing leaves from one of my basil plants. "Megan and I are getting a divorce," he continued finally. "Not just because of this, but because of a lot of things. She never respected you, and I let that happen because it was easier than confronting her. But I don't want to raise Isabella in a home where family isn't respected." "And what do you want from me?" I asked, not with harshness, but with genuine curiosity. "I want you to know my real daughter, not the little girl her parents are training to be polite to adults, but the real Isabella. I want you to help me be a better father than I was a son, and I want my mom back, if she'll have me." I looked at this 38-year-old man who had been my baby, my boy, my difficult teenager, my adult son who had hurt me so deeply, and I realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or pretending the wounds didn't exist. It meant choosing to build something new on the foundation of what I had learned. "Henry," I said, taking his hand for the first time in years, "you can try, but it's going to be different. I'm going to keep living my life, traveling, taking my classes, doing my things. I won't be available every Sunday to cook for a family that doesn't want to be here anymore. I won't tolerate disrespect from anyone, including you." "I understand," he said, squeezing my hand. Can you teach me how to do this right?" I smiled, and it was a genuine smile, free of resentment or bitterness. "We can try." 6 months later, Isabella comes to visit me on Saturday afternoons. Not because her parents need a free babysitter, but because she genuinely enjoys spending time with me. We cook together, we paint terrible but fun watercolors, and we talk about everything and nothing. It took Jenna longer to come around, but she eventually did. Her healing process has been slower, more complicated, but she's also learning to relate to me as a person instead of a function. Megan, as expected, never apologized. But that's okay. I've learned that I don't need validation from people who were never willing to give it. Larry's insurance money is still in my account, earning interest, securing my future, but it's no longer what gives me power. What gives me power is knowing that I can be alone and be happy, that I can love without needing it to be returned in equal measure, that I can set boundaries without guilt. Now, when people ask me how I managed to escape years of emotional family abuse, I tell them this: sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find out who you really are. Sometimes you have to let them break you to discover you're made of stronger stuff than you thought. And sometimes, the family you deserve isn't the one you were born into, but the one you choose to create. Even if that family is just you, your plants, your books, and the peace you build in the silence of your own home. Have you ever experienced anything like this, or do you know someone who has? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach someone else who needs to hear that it's possible to be reborn, even at 64, even after decades of small daily deaths, because it's never too late to discover that you deserve to be loved, starting with yourself.